Welcome. It took 5 years, thousands of hours, hundreds of volunteers from all across the state of Michigan, but the new K-12 content expectations for social studies are out and they've been approved by the Michigan State Board of Education. My name is Dave Johnson and I'm here today with one of the passionate educators who took part in the update to the state's social studies standards. You may have caught last month's video overview, which took kind of a bird's eye view of what the general changes were K-12. And if you did, you know that I promised that in future months we would be meeting with additional people who served on some of those teams to dive a little deeper into specific content. So this month I'm joined by Ellen Zwarensteyn from the Michigan Center for Civic Education, and she's going to tell you a little more about what's changed with the high school civic standards. So why don't you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about who you are and what organization you represent.
My name is Ellen Zwarensteyn, and I have the pleasure to serve as the Executive Director at the Michigan Center for Civic Education. Also instrumental to the standards process was Tom Hinken, who serves at the Muskegon ISD. And for the last couple years, we have been overseeing the various people that have come together to help craft and formulate the revision to this civic standards.
Great, well we appreciate you being here today. Start off by telling us some of the guidelines your team received for updating the civic standards.
So the first guideline that we took to heart was to listen to public feedback about what would make students and teachers' lives better in terms of updating the standards and also making the standards reflect the students themselves so they could see themselves as part of the standards. Also, we wanted to really include the guideline of fewer, clearer, and higher. And in that process, we were able to focus a lot on inquiry based. So what could we set up in the standards that would promote that down the road for teachers to consider in their curriculum, as well as accuracy. So where were places in the standards that we could be more accurate with our terminology? And in the process of having fewer standards, where was there redundancy, either with other content areas or within the standards themselves? And so those were the main factors that motivated our work.
One thing I think a lot of people have noticed is a change in the structure of the civic standards. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened there and what you guys did?
So throughout the process, we really trusted the teachers and their feedback about what do we need to do to set up the standards to be more timeless. And in that, we could incorporate more examples that brought the 2007 standards up to date with today, and also paved the way that teachers could incorporate any future changes as well to case law or other examples. So in the process of going from nearly 100 standards down to the mid-50s, we did notice a lot of areas of redundancy. While the overall number of strands remained the same, we were able to find areas where there were redundancy, where we could collapse, consolidate, as well as update many of the standards. So for instance, strand 1, which is Conceptual Foundations of Civic and Political Life, that had 8 standards in there before. We noticed some redundancy with civic dispositions, which was the old C6, and so we were able to move from 8 standards down to 4. Strand 2 also remains the same, Origins and Foundations of Government of the United States of America. That went from 9 standards to 6 standards, noticing some redundancy with other coursework, especially in U.S. history. Strand 3 also remained the same, the structure and function of governments in the United States of America. And that plural use of the word government is intentional because we're able to recognize more explicitly tribal governments, local governments, state governments in ways that we hadn't in the past. And those standards went from 33 down to 20. Where you start to see some differences in the strands is strands 4, 5, and 6. So old strand 4 was about the United States of America and world affairs. And that strand remains, it's just now the new strand 5. And the reason is that we inserted the new strand 4 is about rights and liberties in the United States of America. And this was really taking the feedback of teachers about how they can best do student-centered learning and the flow of how they already teach some of these different concepts. So here we did a greater in-depth dive over the Bill of Rights, along with the extension of other amendments and the recognition of other rights that people have in the United States. And so the new strand 4 is called Rights and Liberties in the United States of America. And overall, we were able to update those particular examples along with consolidate how it had been formulated in terms of its strand structure. And the old strand 5 and strand 6 are now consolidated into one strand 6. So we were able to maintain strand 5, which is the United States and world affairs, and able to update some of the examples to more of the issues that we are experiencing today, including terrorism, including human trafficking, and be able to provide the platform to have those conversations in the classroom. That allowed us to consolidate both strands 5 and 6 into the new strand 6. And that is about citizenship and civic participation in the United States of America. So all the other strands about civic dispositions, about public policy, about advocacy, about what it takes to become a citizen are now all located in strand 6. So the overall takeaways from all those strands is that we went from 96 down to 54. We were able to update the examples to reflect the world since 2007, and also we're able to create a more student-centered inquiry flow that followed the way that teachers tend to teach the civics course already.
That was no small feat, going down from, I mean, you essentially almost were able to shave that down to half. And being an 18-week course or a 12-week course, if you're teaching in semesters or trimesters, I think a lot of civics teachers will really appreciate the work that you guys put into that.
We hope so.
The 2019 version of the standards detail democratic values and constitutional principles. That reflects a terminology change from what was in the 2007 standards. So tell us a little bit about what the difference between those two things are and the terminology that we used in 2007.
So it did provide greater clarity because 2007 addressed democratic values and principle without necessarily naming what they could be. So one of the aspects that we took on was to see if there was consensus around what those democratic values are. And what we came to find is that there were different ideas about what are various constitutional principles or ways of enacting values, along with the values themselves. That also left a question remaining of what if we don't agree, and what if people want to change their government? What options are there? And so we found a very energetic discussion that resulted in a taxonomy of thought, which we hope brings transparency into how people frame and discuss what democratic values are or could be, and then what might be the various principles to enact it. And in that discussion, when you look at various competing principles, how does this reveal accurate, even though tension-based differences that people may hold dear to themselves? So democratic values remain those goals, those aspirational aspects that people agree to: unalienable rights, equality, justice, consent of the governed, and the common good or general welfare. However, where there is significant disagreement remains in how do you achieve, how do you realize those different goals that are there. So when talking through constitutional principles, what we find is that people might have different ideas of how best to achieve various democratic values. We all hold dear the idea of equality. What are the best ways of achieving it? And constitutional principles are those mechanisms that we try to enact in order to achieve those different values. And that's where really some of our differences lie. And they're all accurate, and that was the important part of the conversation. So it is our hope that when students and teachers talk about democratic values, they also talk about constitutional principles in a way that we can start to see where our differences and our commonalities come from, and all rooted in those founding documents.
There was a lot of discussion about whether we live in a democracy or a republic or a constitutional republic or a democratic republic or a constitutional democracy. Mm-hmm. Where do the 2019 standards land on this? And can you tell us a little bit about how that decision was made?
So the committee together decided to be as accurate as possible with an umbrella term of constitutional democracy. that was also based on immense amount of public feedback that really wanted to make sure that we maintained the word democracy, because it is reflective of where the power lies in our government, and that is in we the people. And so that's what democracy refers to as that umbrella term. We also recognize that there are multiple forms of governance that arise from that umbrella term. And so there are aspects of our lives where we have a republic or representative style of government when we elect people to create laws or enact laws or not enact laws. We also have forms of direct democracy in the more Aristotelian sense of the word. We also have some examples that might be outliers to both of those. And so we wanted to recognize that it is indeed the power of government comes from we the people, the authority of government comes from we the people, and there are multiple forms of government and governance that arise from there. And so that allows the classroom discussion to be accurate about what types of governance arises from the authority that we give to government as we the people.
That sounds like a good inquiry-based question to ask in the classroom as well. So thank you. I know all of the teams worked really diligently with many outside groups to ensure that there was inclusion, both in terms of topic, places, people, etc., especially in the examples. So can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like in civics?
Absolutely. So in the civics aspect, it was really about updating case law in particular and writing the standards in such a way that they could be more timeless, so that as case law expands, that those can then become examples that local districts can choose to include in their curriculum.
A great deal of time and energy went into updating Michigan's content expectations, and I would really like to thank you for your hard work and your team's hard work on updating the Civic Standards and for coming here to talk a little bit more with the rest of the state today.
We really appreciate the opportunity to rework the standards and hope this is very beneficial for our teachers and our students.
Thank you. A companion document that's outlining what Ellen has talked about today is available on the website. And each month we're going to take another deeper dive into one of the content areas that was updated as part of the update to the standards. For all the resources that were referenced here today, check out misocialstudies.org, and we will see you back here next month.